This is Luke Paulson, the Catholic Conservative, and welcome to the news of the week for January 3rd, 2026. And if you enjoy these videos, do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. Nicki Minaj goes MAGA. The music of Nicki Minaj is far from music that glorifies the Almighty. However, if God can use someone like the murderous Saul to spread the gospel as St. Paul, truly anything is possible. Just to be clear, I am not going to give her a blanket endorsement, but some things are worth talking about. Most of what I know about this came from Xavier DeRusso. I've included a link to the relevant video in the description. It seems that her views have led to blacklisting, as is common. We all know that Hollywood and these award shows are run by liberals in an echo chamber. While there is no proof of formal blacklisting, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. In ideologically homogenous industries, unconscious bias, risk aversion, and in-group favoritism can reduce recognition for culturally misaligned artists, even without coordination, intent, or documentation. The fact that both she and President Trump appear to be on the same wavelength is, to put it mildly,
fascinating.
This only makes those who hated her for calling out the genocide by Muslims hate her even more. Allies can come in the strangest places. Corruption, on the other hand, is found virtually everywhere. Imaginary daycare centers. Minnesota is falling downhill since the third world was let in. The liberal media of the state was not going to look into this, and so it is up to the citizen journalists to do their job for them. YouTuber Nick Shirley answered this call. He went to one daycare center and medical facility after another in the North Star State. What he found were empty facilities, and workers who would not even let him enter. White liberals accused him of being with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and even called the police on him, despite him not violating the life, liberty, or property of a single American. I am sure that he only touched on a small number before Karen called the police on him. I would also like to point out that Melissa Hortman was shot after she fought against giving illegals free things. Furthermore, we now have evidence that this is not just Minnesota, but in Ohio and likely the rest of the country as well. However, the same thieves are not taking this lying down. I suspect that they will soon use violence to protect their booty. Revenge of the thieves. We know that liberals are not peaceful because they are the party of looting and rioting. While there are plenty of examples, including assassinations and assassination attempts, those have been shown repeatedly, and so I will not reinvent the wheel on that one. It has rightly been pointed out that a liberal will not call conservatives Nazis because he wishes to harm them. A liberal will call conservatives Nazis to justify harming them. That is a big difference. That is why it is of concern that Governor Tim Walz called Nick Shirley and anyone else investigating white supremacists. Now these so-called daycare centers are trying to defend themselves. They're claiming that the investigation came outside of normal hours, or that there were break-ins that took all of their records. That seems awfully convenient to me. The fact remains that there have already been dozens of arrests and indictments over this scandal. Imagine what could have happened if Walz had become Vice President of the United States. Again, it was up to a private citizen to investigate this. Journalists are called the Fourth Estate, and used to hold the powerful accountable. Now too many are ideologues or cowards. The same cowards who will not report on this are the same cowards who would cover up Epstein. More redacted names. We were told when the Epstein Accountability Act was signed into law that only the victims, and potentially the methods, would be redacted. However, it seems that the criminals who need to be arrested are being protected. From what I can tell, the Department of Justice accidentally released evidence of 10 co-conspirators with Epstein, but their names were redacted. I've had my name dragged through the mud before, and it is not pretty, but it happens. Yes, it is uncomfortable to have your name out there, but this is not about comfort. It is about justice, and keeping this from happening again. I suspect that they were not named because they are either very rich or the ones in charge of the investigation. I have found that more often than not, those who are in charge of enforcing the rules have the most to gain from breaking the rules. We knew that there would be a lot of redactions, but the inevitable backstabbing is still painful. One thing that I have learned is that the deep state protects its own.
So how do you define it?
Well, the way I would define the deep state is an increased willingness by more and more government civil servants to pursue political objectives rather than stand up for the values of the institution they're a part of. They are not neutral. They're not politically neutral.
However, the American deep state is just one part of the problem. It is a mere branch of corruption. Just like the United Nations, UN funding cuts. A lot of people in the Make America Great Again or MAGA movement are upset with President Trump. They say that he is moving too slowly, or that there are not enough arrests. Well, both are true. President Trump is having to fix decades, nay centuries, of corruption very quickly with an administration that is not always aligned with him. As such, I take you to the United Nations. The United Nations is funded by member states based on their national wealth. This means that the states that just cannot produce anything or spend their money on useless things might not pay as much. Naturally, the United States is the biggest contributor at $17 billion just in humanitarian aid. However, this money is not going to feed the poor. How do we know that? Elon Musk was approached by the UN. He was asked to redistribute his hard-earned money to their so-called humanitarian outreach programs. Musk agreed to donate $6 billion to the cause as long as there was oversight and open accounting. They turned his offer down based on those terms. As such, one can only believe that this was just a money laundering scheme. Now President Trump has cut this so-called humanitarian aid from $17 billion to just $2 billion. That is only 11% of the original amount that was donated for laundering. President Trump has a lot of work to do, and he is working as fast as he can. However, there are two things that happen that may make it easier. The first is in the swamp itself, suing the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the single most corrupt entity in the entire swamp. And that is saying something. Recently, they decided to build themselves a new palace to work out of, but it has gone way over budget. This was done during the presidency of someone who worked in real estate.
Not a great plan.
Now, President Trump is threatening to sue the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, for incompetence. It is no secret that President Trump is not a fan of this cabal of private bankers. Could this be part of a 3D chess move to get rid of the abomination once and for all?
Only Poppins would know.
Now I mentioned two things. The second takes us to Georgia. The ballots were fraudulent. There are 1,096,737 people in Fulton County, Georgia, according to WorldPopulationReview.com. It has now been reported by Fulton County that 315,000 ballots were not signed by poll workers. This is in addition to the rest of the alleged fraud that was happening during the 2020 election. Naturally, I'm going to have to tread carefully on this topic. The election is one of two things that happened in 2020 that could still get me removed from YouTube if I mention them. Now, what is significant about the number 315,000? In and of itself, not much. However, that is nearly a third of the total population of the state. Now, in most elections, even in presidential elections, not everyone is old enough to vote, not everyone is legally able to vote, and not everyone cares to vote. And so, being incredibly generous, the turnout may have been closer to 600,000. If my calculations are correct, that means that every other ballot was potentially fraudulent. How many other counties, even states, could this have happened in?
The world may never know.
Now I take you to the other side of the country, where people are likewise seeing the light. Parents supersede teachers. Imagine for a moment a world in which a teacher does not have to tell parents if their child wants to remove healthy and functioning organs. That was the case in California until very recently. Schools in California were hiding from parents that children wanted to transition. Maybe the students were hiding it from their parents because they knew that their parents did not approve. Maybe these parents knew but were trying to stop it. Maybe these parents just thought that such a delusion would not approach their kids. In the same vein as, this could happen to someone else, but not to me. Whatever the case, schools should have a legal obligation to inform the parents. Liberals are naturally none too happy about this, because they want to live in a world where the government owns the children. Now, I would like to remind all of you that this is just a judicial ruling and it can potentially be overturned. It would be better if this were codified into law. But ultimately, this is a battle over the mind. Two worldviews are at odds here. Now, speaking of worldviews, let us look at a national issue. The subsidies are gone. The so-called Affordable Care Act may finally be dead. For those of you who are unaware, this massive abomination not only violated human rights by forcing people to pay for something that they did not want or need, it was run entirely by subsidies. This means that you did not directly pay, but instead money was taken from you by force. And this paid for everyone. As such, personal incentive and accountability were gone. Now President Trump wishes to replace this abomination with health savings accounts. Additionally, there are a few other possible actions. We can allow people to buy health insurance across state lines, increasing competition. We can mandate that hospitals publish the costs of their services to provide transparency. We can end the subsidies to fast food so that the cost is not artificially lower and people will eat healthier food. We can allow rates to increase if the person is a smoker, drinker, or has a dangerous job because otherwise they raise rates on everyone else. There are probably some other things that can be done without the federal government mandating what people do and do not buy. One thing that I do know is that President Trump will not be suing nuns.
Maybe I'm just blowing smoke. Maybe I'm completely off my rocker, but that is just my opinion. And do not forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe for more. But before you go, on the left I have last week's video, but you may also enjoy the video on the right.